commercial real estate broker practically across country from Las Vegas. Teddy, a small press publisher from Syracuse. Mickey, a musician and sound engineer from nearby Cape Cod. All were 66 years old and had attended the same small liberal arts college in Connecticut where they had slung hash at the campus sorority. The other hashers, mostly frat boys, claimed to be there by choice because so many of the thetas were hot, whereas Lincoln, Teddy, and Mickey were scholarship students doing the job out of varying degrees of economic necessity. Lincoln, as good-looking as any of the frat boys, was immediately made a face man, which meant donning a scratchy white waist-length jacket to serve the girls in the sorority's large dining room. Teddy, who had worked in a restaurant during his junior and senior years of high school, became a cook's helper, making salads, stirring sauces, planning entrees, and desserts. Mickey? They took one look and escorted him over to the sink, where a mountain of dirty pots sat piled alongside a large cardboard box of off-brand steel scrubbers. Such was their freshman year. By the time they were seniors, Lincoln had been made head hasher and could offer both his friends positions in the dining room. Teddy, who had had enough of the kitchen, promptly accepted, but Mickey said he doubted there was a serving jacket big enough to fit him, and anyway, he preferred remaining a kitchen slave to making nice with the fancy girls out front, since at least the gallery was his own. Converging on the island 44 years later, all three were grateful for the educations they'd received at Minerva, where classes had been small but professors available and attentive. To the naked eye, it looked like most colleges did in the late 60s and early 70s. The boys had long hair and wore faded jeans and psychedelic t-shirts. In dorm rooms, kids smoked dope and covered the smell with incense and listened to the Doors in Buffalo Springfield. But these were mere matters of style. To most of their classmates, the war seemed a long way off. Something that was going on in Southeast Asia and Berkeley and on TV, not in coastal Connecticut. Editorials in the Minerva Echo were forever lamenting the lack of any real activism on campus. Nothing's happening here, one said, riffing on the famous song lyric. Where that is ain't exactly clear. No place on campus was less rebellious than the Theta House. A few girls smoked weed and went brothers, but otherwise the sorority was a protective bubble. And yet it was here, far more than in their classes, that the real world began to reveal itself conspicuously enough that even 19-year-olds like Lincoln and Teddy and Mickey could not ignore it. The cars parked out back of the Theta lot were not only nicer than those in the regular student lots, but also those of the faculty's lot. Stranger still, at least to these young men who didn't come from wealth, the owners of these vehicles in the Theta lot didn't feel particularly lucky to be at Minerva, or even to have parents who could afford the staggering tuition. Where they came from, Minerva was the natural extension of the first 18 years of their lives. Indeed, for many, this had been their safety school. And they had spent their freshman year getting over the disappointment of not getting into Wesleyan or Williams or one of the Ivies. Though they had known the statistics on grades and SATs required to get into such elite institutions, they were used to having other factors count too, things that you could neither talk about nor quantify, but that still caused doors to magically open. Anyway, Minerva was fine. At least they'd gotten into the Theta House, that was how they looked at it. Otherwise, they might as well have gone to UConn. On December 1st, 1969, the evening of the nation's first draft lottery, Lincoln convinced the house mother to let the hashers have dinner a half an hour early, so they could all crowd around a tiny black and white Mr. Minter? There? How about over here? Okay. Okay. Where were we? Yes, we're going let's see. Yukon, okay. That's right. Well, Lincoln convinced the House leader to let the Hashers serve dinner a half hour early so they could all crowd around the tiny black and white TV in the background while the Hashers ate their meals. Given that their fates hung in the balance, the mood was strangely buoyant, at least at the beginning. Of the 8 Hashers' birthdays, Mickey's came up first. 9th out of 366 possibilities, causing the others to break into a chorus of "Oh Canada," which might have gone over better if they had known more than the first 2 words of the song. Of the 3 friends, Lincoln's number came up next at 189. Better, but not safe enough, and impossible to make plans around. As the lottery continued, a relentless drumbeat of birthdays, April 1st, September 23rd, April 21st. The mood in the room grew somber. Earlier, while serving the girls' dinner, they had all been in the same boat, but now their birthdays had made individuals of them, people with singular destinies, and one by one they drifted away, back to their dorm rooms and apartments, where they would call their parents and their girlfriends to discuss the fact that their lives had just changed. Some for the better, others for the worst. Their grades, their SATs, their popularity suddenly beside the point. By the time Kitty's birthday finally came up, he and Lincoln and Mickey were the only ones left in the Hasher room. Passionately opposed to the war, Kitty had told his friends earlier that day that he would go to Canada or to jail rather than get drafted, so to him this lottery was meaningless. But of course that wasn't true. He didn't want to go to Canada, and as he saw that when push came to shove, he had the necessary courage of his convictions to actually go to jail in protest. Distracted by these thoughts, by the time only 20-odd unannounced birthdays remained, he was convinced that his had already been run out, and that he had somehow missed it. Maybe when they were adjusting the TV's lavatories. But then, there it was. Number 322 out of 366. He was beyond safe. Reaching up to turn off the TV, he realized his hand was shaking. There were a dozen or so friends that they counted as friends, but only Jesse Conway, with whom all 3 were in love, was waiting outside in the sorority's back entrance when they finally emerged into the frigid dark. Once Nicky told her, with that big, goofy grin plastered on his face, that it looked like he was headed for Southeast Asia, she slid down off the hood of the car that she had been sitting in, buried her face in his chest, hugged him close, and said into his shirt, "Those fuckers." Lincoln and Teddy, both looking around that night, when that, not smart, not rich, was what you desperately wanted to be, they managed nevertheless to feel intense jealousy when they saw the girl of their collective dreams in Mickey's arms. Never mind the uncomfortable truth that she was already engaged to another young man entirely. As if Mickey's good fortune in this brief moment somehow mattered more than the short straw that he'd drawn an hour earlier. Then, as his birthday was announced, both Lincoln and Teddy had had the same sickening reaction. That 2 years ago, the people in charge had taken one look at Mickey and assigned him to the shittiest casual duty in the theater house. And when he reported for duty now, he would again be sized up at a glance and sent straight to the front lines Okay, we're going to skip ahead a little bit here to the third of these three musketeers. Mickey Girardi was from a rough working class neighborhood in West Haven, Connecticut, famous for bodybuilders, Harleys, and ethnic black bodies. His parents were Alice
Union, which he figured was even better. Mickey was the youngest of 8, the other 7 all girls. And he was spoiled rotten in so many respects. Clothes bought especially for him, his own room right from the start. Okay, it was about the size of a closet, but so what? The family's house was large as it needed to be, but also modest, only 3 blocks from the beach. Great in the summer when the cool breezes came in off the water. When the wind changed direction, though, you felt like you were living under the nearby interstate. The traffic noise was so loud. Sunday dinners, you were home, and no excuses. Spaghetti with sausage and meatballs and pork shoulder braising in tomato sauce. Michael Sr.'s mother's recipe, handed down reluctantly to her Irish daughter-in-law, with 1 or 2 key ingredients left out for the sake of contrast. Family first, America second, or maybe vice versa these days with so many grubby long hairs always flashing their imbecilic peace signs, and everything else in the Girardi home a distant third. For Mickey, music came first. His first job was sweeping up a mall music store where... Did I lose you again? No, okay, all right. Music store where he had seen a Fender Stratocaster guitar and fallen in love. After the guitar came an amp. In a band at age 13, by 16 sneaking into raunchy New Haven bars and sitting in with older guys whose girlfriends didn't wear bras and seemed to enjoy revealing this fact by bending over in front of Mickey, who would later joke with Lincoln and Teddy that he had a hard-on for all of 1965. I catch you doing drugs with those guys, his father warned, and you're going to be the first kid in America ever beaten to death with a Fenson guitar. Fender, Mickey corrected him. Okay, bring it here. Bring it right here now then, smartass. We'll do it. Right here, save time. About the last thing in the world that Mickey wanted to do was go to college. In school, he had always hovered between mediocre and piss poor. But all of his sisters had gone or were going, and college was what his mother wanted. Community college, live at home, that was the plan. Mr. Easy, his mother called him, always the path of least resistance. And Mickey supposed she was right. He wasn't terribly ambitious. But he failed to see what was so wrong with staying in West Haven. With his sisters gone, there was plenty of room, especially on Sundays and holidays, except on Sundays and holidays. Unfortunately, to go even to community college, you had to take the SAT. So one Saturday morning, Mickey did. Not wanting to disappoint his mother by being the only kid ever rejected from a community college because of his SATs, he declined a gig the night before and actually got a good night's sleep. He figured it wouldn't kill him to try for once. Tuition was cheap, and if he did well enough to snag a few bucks to help with books and expenses, it had put him in good with the old man. When the results came back, his mother met his father at the door. "Have a look at this," she said, pointing to their son's score, which was in the top 2%. "The kid's brilliant," she said. Since Mickey was the only kid in the room, his father looked around to make sure that there wasn't another hiding somewhere. "Which kid?" he said. "This one." His mother said, "Your son." His father scratched his head. "This one right here?" "Yes, our Michael. His father studied the SAT results, then his wife, then Mickey, then his wife again. Okay, he said finally, who's the father? I've always wondered. The next day, Michael Sr. was still trying to work it out. Take a walk with me, he said, grabbing Mickey's shoulder with a meaty paw. When they were down the block and out of earshot, he said, all right, come clean and I promise I won't get mad. Who'd you get to take that test for you? Mickey felt his left eye twitch. You know what, Pop? He said. Don't say it, his father warned. Fuck you, Mickey said, completing his thought. Senior stopped walking and threw up his hands. You said it, he said, and then he cuffed his son on the back of the head hard enough to make Mickey's eyes water. Help me out here, because I want to understand. You're saying this test is on the up and up? Mickey nodded. You're telling me you're smart. I'm not telling you anything, Mickey said. You're telling me that all this time you could have done good in school and made your mother proud? Mickey felt that seeing things in this light took some of the luster off of his near-perfect SAT. He shrugged. What were we thinking? His father said, more to himself than his son. We were doing so good with girls. Sorry, Mickey said. Okay, listen up, his father said, because this is what's going to happen. You're going to go to college, and you're going to do good. No discussion. You either make your mother proud or you don't come home. Mickey started to object, only to discover that he wasn't sure he wanted to. He himself was still processing the remarkable SAT results and had begun thinking beyond community college. At West Haven High, when the word got around about his SATs, several of his former teachers had stopped him in the hall. Hey, what have we been telling you? They said. So instead of objecting to his old man's command, he said, can I major in music? His father looked at the sky and then at him. Why do you always have to push your luck? He said. Can I major in music? Mickey said. Fine, Senior said. Major in fencing guitars for all I care. Mickey thought about correcting him, but his father did have a point. He was always pushing his luck. Thank you. All right, we kind of made a mistake by turning off those other microphones, but this will work. Yeah. Hi. Oh, yes, I am. Of course I am. Yes. Oh, yes. And if you would, use the microphones. And if anyone can't hear, I will repeat.
Mr. Russo, this isn't working either, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is.
I did buy it yesterday, and between sessions, read that first section, and then cut every other panel session. It is terrific, and everybody will like it. Going all the way back to the beginning of your novels, you've never been unkind to your characters. Do you feel you've become more forgiving of human nature as you've, I won't say gotten older, but written more novels?
My feeling about my characters is, well, first of all, thank you for the compliment that I try not to be unkind to my characters. It's pretty easy because for the most part, I select them on their likability and interest because most of these books take me 3 or 4 years to write, and I don't want to be in the company of fictional people that I don't like any more than I want to be in the company of real people I don't like. So usually the reason they're in there at all is that I have some affection for them to begin with, even when I don't know that much about them. But also, here's my thought. Once you come to the conclusion, as I have and did fairly early, that most human human beings are either fools or capable of foolishness,
Right.
Sometimes catastrophic foolishness. They become much more entertaining. You see yourself in them, or at least I won't speak for you, but I see myself in them. And so when I write about these characters, I'm almost always finding something of myself in them. That said, many people have noted that over the years, that the characters in my earlier novels are probably a little bit more likable, at least than some of the characters in my later novels, which have gotten darker. Right. If you read, for instance, if you were to read Nobody's Fool and Everybody's Fool back to back, which not very many people would have done since they were published 23 years apart, but if you were to read them back to back, even though they have many of the same characters, you would find that the second book is much darker. There are 3 characters in Everybody's Fool that I had to take dark journeys with that kind of terrified me. There's a woman beater in that book, and there's actually a person in there who's selling poisonous serpents. I mean, in the second book, evil has been let out right. into the garden. There are honest to God serpents in that book. So to go back to conclude your question, I think I'm fundamentally a pretty optimistic person and writer. I think that all of our optimism has been sorely tested, and not just recently. Really, I think those 2 novels were 23 years apart, but a lot has happened during those 23 years and the 5 years since then. So there is a bit more darkness. I find my optimism tested, and find it more of a challenge today, having that easy affection that I had in the first half of my career. Finding it's I'm tested more these days. Okay. Did I answer your question?
You certainly did.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
Hi. One of the things that's remarkable about your writing to me is your ability to have a beautiful beginning, middle, and end, where the characters seem very well formed, and you feel a sense of completion at the end of the book. When you write these novels, do you know what's going to happen at the end when you start at the beginning?
Not often. I'll know a few things about the book that I'm about to begin. Otherwise, if you don't know something, why would you begin it rather than some other book? But generally, I don't know. I try to write my novels the same way I read novels, which is to find out how they end. Usually at some point, maybe, I don't know, halfway through, 2/3 through, I'll figure out, there are usually 2 moments. One of which is the moment where you realize what the book is about, because that's often not obvious to the writer. The final good trick of any novelist is to make all of you think that I knew what I was doing from the start, right? But that means that there is that moment where this book you've been writing on, you knew you liked the characters, you knew you were interested in their dilemmas, you wanted to see what happened to them, so there's the element of curiosity going on. But at some point, you recognize something that you didn't know at the beginning, and you say to yourself, okay, I get it. This is a book about blank, fill in the blank. When I was writing Empire Falls, for instance, I was probably almost halfway through and just kind of looking through what I had done already, and I was able to fill in that blank. I was able to say, all right, Empire Falls is a book about cruelty. Even though I'd been writing all those, the various ways that people were being cruel to each other in that book, it hadn't filtered into my brain yet that that's what this book was about. When you realize that, when you realize what your book is about, then it opens up a certain number. Number one, once you realize what it's about, you can also then look at what you've written so far and say to yourself, all right, I got to emphasize this more. And you know what? This other stuff over here was interesting, but it doesn't really fit in this book because it's not what you, it doesn't contribute to what you just figured out what the book was about. And then later on, maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, you'll get a glimpse of the finish line where you say to yourself, okay, here's where it ends. It ends in this scene with this particular event happening, and then you're just going to, everything else after that point is just wrapping it up. It might interest you to know, for instance, though, that there are still some things that you don't know until you actually write them. This book is so old, I can't imagine it's going to be spoilers for anybody under this tent. But Empire Falls ends up with a school shooting. And I did not know until I wrote that scene whether Miles's daughter Tick was going to survive that scene or not. So, but I mean, so there's certain things you know, certain things you suspect, and you move towards them with a kind of open mind. But it's not a bad thing to put off final knowledge for as long as you can, because the longer you can put this off, because it's just not as interesting when you know everything. It keeps you going the same way it keeps a reader going.
Great, thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. You talked exclusively about your novels, but one of my favorite pieces of your writing was The Identity Thief. And it was a very marked departure from what I grew used to with you. I wonder if you can comment on what kind of a departure that was for you. And I hope people are familiar with that, because it's really a wonderful series.
You're being so kind, and you're saying such wonderful things. I hate to correct you. The book is called The Destiny Thief.
What did I say?
Talk about, you said identity. It's so churlish of me to correct you when you're saying such nice things to me.
I stand corrected.
The Destiny Thief is a departure in some ways, and in other ways not. It's a departure because if you know me at all, it's probably not for writing essays. The essays from The Destiny Thief were probably written over a period of like 10 to 15 years. Things that I'd published a few of them, but some of them were very new. I like the essay form. I simply didn't do that much of it because I was always working on a novel, or fiction of some sort, screenplays, short stories, whatever. So it is a departure. I found that I loved the essay form when I was writing the book, and when it all came together, it was profoundly satisfying. I love those. I love those essays. I think that the idea that I would publish them as a book came to me only when I began to see what I was doing in them. I knew what I was doing in each one, but I didn't know necessarily how they fit together, how they might make a book. But it dawned on me that if you look at all of those essays, the thing that almost all of them have in common is the theme of destiny. That's when I had the title. But it also sent me back to the book that I had published before that, which was called Trajectory, and it was 4 stories about destiny, about men and women in their 50s for the most part, waking up one day, looking at their life, knowing that they're more than halfway done. Be honest. Right? They're more than halfway done, and suddenly realizing that the life that they have lived was not the one that they planned. Where did they go wrong? Where did they go right? If that's the conclusion. So then I thought to myself, all right, I'm writing in the essay form about the same thing that I was writing about in my last book of short stories. And also I had this idea, it was about that time when I was writing the last of those Destiny Thief essays. I had the glimmer of an idea for this book, chances are, which is all about destiny. It's all about the building blocks of destiny. Those things we have control over, those things that we have no control over, and those things, and just every now and then, chance the lottery comes in and just screws everything up. So really, these three books, one a novel, one a collection of short stories, and one a collection of essays, are me pondering the same imponderable question for the last decade, whatever. And don't ask me, by the way, don't ask me for my conclusions, because I'm no closer to answers on the end. And there may be more on the same subject. Yes, hi.
Hi. I'm a huge fan of your novels. I think I've read them all. But the last one I read was Everybody's Fool, but I listened to it on audiobooks, and I thought it was a terrific read that way. And I think your reading shows that you've got a sort of a good grasp of oral, of dialogue.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about how you feel about audiobooks, and whether the economics are the same for you, whether you have any control over the reader, and whether you think about audiobooks when you write.
Audiobooks are the new paperback, I think, at least in terms of the market, because there was a time not that long ago that the hardcover book would come out, and not everybody could afford hardcover books. The paperback would come out, and that's when your biggest sales would come in with paperbacks. Since the digital revolution, all of that has changed. Now the hardcover comes out, and at the same time, you can buy a digital copy for half price. Why publishers ever agreed to this is one of life's great mysteries, but they did. And the effect of that is that paperbacks have been eroded completely. But lo and behold, into that space, that important space that used to be held by paperbacks, we now have audiobooks. Two things. First of all, I have never listened to any of my of the books that were made into audiobooks, which I think is all of them. I did the audiobook for two of the shorter ones myself, but I've never listened to any of the pros do their work. But I've listened to others, and all I can say is, to those people who do audiobooks, like the good ones, like the ones you're talking about, those people are just incredible professionals. They are wonderful actors. They'll give the characters each their own voice in some instances. It is a performance. And when I was doing Elsewhere and The Horse Child, those were the two books that I read, I was fascinated by how there is a director in the room. He's outside the booth. But he or she will stop you. Usually, I was thinking, you read, and if you make a mistake, you stop and go back to the beginning of the sentence and do it again. But it's much more challenging than that. They want that to be a performance, and so sometimes you'll be reading along, and the director will put her hand up and say, "Let's do that again," and you're thinking, "Why? I didn't stumble. I don't. None of all the words are there," and it's because they sensed your concentration drifting away right there. And so you go back, and it takes a very long time to do these books, because they're not just looking, they just don't want you, it's not that you're flubbing your lines, it's that you're not totally present in those lines. So, and I love the form myself. I'm always fascinated by when my wife and I go on a trip. We know we're going to be on the road for a while. We love to take an audiobook with us, but the books that I check out or buy for a car trip are not necessarily the same ones that I buy in the bookstore. Are you like that? Yeah, there's something. You want pure entertainment, I think, for a book that they're taking on a trip. Or at least I do, anyway. Yeah. Hi.
You mentioned one of my favorite works, which is Elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How difficult was that for you to write?
Yeah. Think of it in terms of like rectal bleeding.
It's just, as somebody who's lost a parent and had a fault, a complicated, faulty parent, it's It's very touching.
Well, first of all, thank you. That was I've never done anything more difficult as a writer than write that book. And I felt guilty for writing it every day that I was writing it. I also felt stupid for writing it just about every day that I was writing it too, because I was halfway through Everybody's Fool when I started that, and I was having a ball writing Everybody's Fool. It was wonderful. I was laughing myself silly every day I went to the computer. I was having a wonderful time. And I just stopped it. I stopped writing that book, and I went to write elsewhere, because it seemed to me that there was unfinished business there between my mother and me, because that book is really more about her life than it is about mine. And it just seemed to me that I wasn't going to be right somehow. I was dreaming about her a lot, and I had a lot of sadness that I couldn't quite correlate to anything. It just felt like something was wrong, and so I started writing the book, and it was horrible just about every day. But it was the best thing I could have done at the time, despite the fact that I was making myself terribly unhappy, because in writing the book, I came to understand something about our relationship that I didn't know. That I didn't know before. I had always thought that my mother and I had a rough go of it because she and I were so different. I mean, it just seemed to me throughout my childhood and my adult life, every time her impulse was to zig, mine was to zag. And so we were constantly at loggerheads. We loved each other, there was no question about that, but life wasn't easy. It certainly wasn't easy for her. But in writing that book, I came to understand something so obvious, something that had eluded me for I wrote that at probably age 60 or 58. So for 58 years, I had somehow not managed to understand that the reason my mother and I were having such a time was not because we were so different, but because we were so similar. Maybe that's not a bad place to end. Thank you all so much for coming.